That movie had a lot of heart, right? Yes. A lot of heart. And, you know, I realized in that movie how intoxicating money can be, regardless of your race. And let's start this conversation with the panel introducing themselves for those who may not be familiar with everybody. And then we'll get into a discussion about not only the movie, but the correlation to the city of Atlanta and what can be done.
My name is Bertha Darden, and I am a resident in Peoplestown.
I'm Tanya Washington, resident of Peoplestown.
I'm Allison Johnson, a member of Housing Justice League, also the executive director, one of the co-founders, along with many others out here in the audience today.
Hi, I'm sorry, I have a cold. I'm Deborah Scott, executive director of Georgia Stand Up.
Hello, I'm Dan Albin. I'm a senior attorney at the Institute for Justice, the firm from the film.
Awesome. And before I continue, I got to say hello to my dear colleague from News and Talk 1380 WAOK, Mary Gill. Y'all give it up. That is our registered real estate expert. When you see that movie, and I want to start with you, Tanya, because we've been doing this for a few years now, but when you see that movie, what goes through your mind? Is it an emotional experience?
Very much so. I was wiping away tears and rubbing Miss Darden's back as she was wiping away tears because, you know, you fight, but when you come home, when you pull up to your house every day for 7 years and you don't know what's going to happen, you're living in that question mark, and you sit in your car and cry before you get out of the car to go in to the house, it's painful. When you wake up to the sounds of a house being demolished, it's painful. When you go to work and then you come home and you have one fewer neighbor than you had when you left for work, it's painful. So we've been living this, but I do want to say the thing that has made it bearable is if you see the pictures that are scrolling behind us, there are so many people who are here in this audience who have stood with us. And that sense of community has made it easier. Sharice and Deborah and Allison and, you know, my coworkers, just people have made it bearable. Senator Ford, just this has been a 7-year fight. You find out who your friends are when you're in the trenches.
Ms. Darden, you've been in this. How do you view the leadership?
1 second.
Yes.
People who have checks, make those checks out to the Housing Justice League. I would only interrupt you for money.
I understand. I'm completely okay with that. I would do the same to you, Senator. Okay. What is your view right now of the current leadership of the city of Atlanta? Do you see a contrast between the former administration and this one, or is it the same?
You know, it's a twofold question and a twofold answer.
Yeah.
Because I lived through the first mayor who started it. And I was hoping that our new mayor now, Keisha Lance Bottom, would do better. But everything that we've asked of her has not been done. It has not been done. So it's like she's following in his footsteps, a little slower about doing it, but it's the same thing. Same thing. Because what we've asked for is just the truth. And year after year, we find out new evidence that they're trying to take our home, but it's not for what they say they're going to take it for. First, it was the park and the pond. Then we get evidence that there's no data, there's no modeling, to put a parking pond there. If you were going to put one there, where is the evidence? We asked for it, the judge asked for it, and the city of Atlanta, I love Atlanta, but our city councils, our mayors, they are not doing the job that we voted them in for. They are not doing the job we voted them in for. It's like they're taking sides with the enemy against us.
Okay, so I heard the engineer just came in, the former engineer, right? Right? How are you? Stand up.
Our Shiro.
Yeah, I thought that was really powerful. So I've read the documentation. I've obviously seen the email thread that absolutely said, yeah, we really don't have to do this, okay? Now, that's damning evidence. That shows a contrary narrative than what has been promoted. At this point, let me go to our lawyer. Why is this still so difficult? Obviously, they were lied to. What's the problem?
Well, the problem is partly what you saw in the film, that the U.S. Supreme Court made it extremely easy for cities and counties across the country to use eminent domain to take people's homes. And even when you have evidence showing that the reason for the taking is pretextual, the Supreme Court has held that if any judge can come up with a rational basis for why the government might be doing what it's doing, not a good reason, not a reason that's documented by evidence, just a rational basis for the seizure and condemnation of the home, they can go forward with that condemnation. And that's really the problem here. The Supreme Court failed to protect people's property rights. As a result of that, a number of states across the country passed eminent domain reforms. Georgia is one of those states. In 2006, there were very strong reforms passed here in Georgia preventing taking property from one person and giving it to someone else. Unfortunately, that doesn't take away the desire by city governments to take people's property and do things with it. And now they're trying to get around that restriction by coming up with supposed public uses like water retention ponds that aren't really the real reason for why the city is trying to do the taking. There's other cities where the same sort of thing is happening. In Tulsa, they're trying to do a very similar thing where they're going to put in a water retention pond, and it's going to be surrounded by cafes and restaurants and condos, but the people who live there now, live there originally, would all be displaced by the use of eminent domain.
Can we talk about who's really pushing this? Because politicians don't really run for office in order to take your property. People are influencing them to do so, right? And because they don't have a backbone to stand up to some of these developers. So, sister, I want to ask you, what's the public strategy in your mind and the private strategy to get these elected officials to stand up for the community that actually voted them in? No.
Well, just to add, I believe that one of those contributing factors also to this issue is the dominant narrative, and who's dominating that narrative, and how that narrative is inflicted upon community. And when I say that, I'm talking about people who've been in, particularly a Peoplestown community, for many, many decades, have different wants and different needs. And when an issue arises, there's this system that doesn't work or has value within the community that allows communities' narratives to dominate what other people's narratives may be. So I think we kind of demonstrated what we needed to do when Tanya ran for office and how we were going to be supported in that way. I think more community people need to get into those positions where we are electing each other's best interests and electing organizational interests, but it's very, very hard when the dominant narrative is about another class. So we've got a lot of work to do there.
And I just want to add to that, also, it's hard to tell the truth about what's happening to black and brown communities in Atlanta, right? In New London, it was a working class white community. Here in Atlanta, it's a black community when the leadership is black, right? What do we call predatory use of law against vulnerable people and communities when the people perpetuating it look like the people who are victimized by it?
Yeah, that
It's
is-
the same thing.
That is so interesting. Yeah, and even though these politicians are black, a lot of the developers who are backing them are not. Sure.
So, for how many people have been in Atlanta over 30 years? Okay, so you remember all the stadiums, and you remember when the stadiums were built. Tell us what you think the real problem is about the pipes coming from Fulton County Stadium, coming from Atlanta, the Brave Stadium now, no, Georgia State Stadium, Georgia State. So what's the real problem? And what's the problem with the water?
What we think the real problem is, because we know the flooding is a pretext, because it was documented back in 2013 that that wasn't the real reason they needed that block. The water is intermittently brown. There is a large pipe that runs under our block that services, I don't even know how much of the city in that area. And we have video of the brown water. City officials city workers have shared with us that the pipes are corroded and that the solution has been to add chlorine to the water to disguise the taste and the smell. And so the thought, and this is how I'm making sense of all of these facts, is that instead of fixing that and admitting that it was a problem, you created a lie. Wow. And it was flooding, right? So while you were building a park and pond, you were going to fix the pipes without anybody knowing about it. The other reality that I want to share is that, and the woman in the video, in the movie said it, we don't fit in what they want Peoplestown to look like now. The houses across the street from me in the last year, and it's only 2020, sold for $650 and $675, right? So the people who have lived there for years, like Miss Darden and her husband, we don't fit. Our houses don't look the way they want the neighborhood to look. And so any device at their disposal is being used. But I'm thinking this is another Flint situation, another Newark situation, and I need the city to just tell the truth and fix the problem.
Is there no way to try to prove that?
Oh, there are ways. We plan to test the water, right? Because the test results won't lie. Now, it's brown. So, in my mind, I'm telling myself, oh, well, that's just a little rust, maybe a little iron. It's good for you. But that's not how water is supposed to look on a regular basis. And it's not just brown in my home. So these are not my pipes. When I speak to my cousin who lives several doors up from me, it's brown in her pipes as well. She's experiencing brown water. Many of our neighbors are. So this is a neighborhood problem that needs a solution, and the city is responsible for this. And instead of spending their time creating pretextual justifications, they need to do the right thing.
Who are the allies on city council for this movement, if any?
There were some allies.
Let's talk about the allies. Let's highlight them.
There were some
Obvious
allies.
allies. I don't know that there's a true ally that are obvious to support what we're trying to do. You may know. I don't know.
Well, I would say that there are some allies because next year is an election year, right? And so every single seat in city council and the mayor is up for re-election. And so just like we have organized for the last 4 years, we're going to organize for the next year because every single seat in city council is up. So you have to vote your principles. This is the time to vote your principles.
And so I want to recognize City Council Member Bond and Dickens for introducing some legislation to withdraw the lawsuits. So that did happen. But what happened? It died in committee, a silent, tortured death. And they wouldn't even vote on it. They kept holding it, and they wouldn't even tell us why. So when I look at the city council in the movie, pulling dirty tricks, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing dirty tricks and dirty water.
I want to make sure I open it up. We have enough time to talk to those in the audience.
So this young lady, she wanted
Yes.
to know who are the principals behind this, just like we knew Pfizer was behind what New London was doing.
name of the
Who do we
companies.
think is really behind pushing the city? So I would say every city has a main driving force. So in New Orleans, it's the Restaurant Association. They run New Orleans, right? In New York, it's someone else, right? In Atlanta, the developers run the city. The developers run the city. So when you have a development that is called Summerhill right up the street, and they name their development after the neighborhood, when you have development all around them, and you have a major institution like Georgia State right there, it's easy to determine that the value proposition is that people want that land because it's valuable. Right up the street, if you take Atlanta Avenue up the street, you go into Grant Park, right? Walking. So there's a tale of two cities right on this block called Atlanta Avenue. So the developers.
Well, but we could be more specific than that. The devil got a name. Hello now, the devil got a name. This was happening concurrently with the Georgia State takeover of the stadium and the property around it. This retention pond, if I'm wrong, correct me, could have gone over there. And even there was discussion about putting the retention pond over at near the stadium on the property that Georgia State wanted. The reason they put it in your neighborhood is because Georgia State wanted to use that land that they wanted to buy to do what? To build and develop. This is a case, just like in many other cities, of academic institutions, universities, being a driving force behind development. The devil got a name. The devil's name is who? Georgia State University, the president, City Hall, both mayors, Bottoms and Reed. So let's not get this amorphous thing about is somebody who bad or mean. It's about specific people who are doing the bidding of millionaires and billionaires. So speak the truth, shame the what? Devil. Number two, in order to understand what's going on here, and I'm going to be concise, but this is not happening in a vacuum. I already said it was happening with the gentrification of the stadium area. Peoplestown, Mechanicsville, and to the west, Adair Park in Pittsburgh. But also, guess what's happening at the school in the area? It's being gentrified. The entering class, just look at the entering class at Maynard Jackson High School. The kids are coming out of the middle school, charter schools, going into the public schools, and guess who is working to control those public schools? Okay? Do they look like the people who lived there 5 or 10 years ago? No. There's a racial and class component. So as housing is gentrified, so is what? Education gentrified. The PTA gentrified. They won't even give money to the kids who need scholarships to attend the prom at the school. And guess who those kids look like? They look like black children, because they are black children. So in order to understand what's going on in here is you have to put it in context. What they're doing, the Tanya Washington, Miss Darden, Miss Jackson, and other folk is a part of how this city is being what? Gentrified. Anytime you see bike lanes, anytime you see a belt line, anytime you see a pond, you gonna get condos and you gonna get gentrification, and that's what's happening here. Providing you with what? Context to understand what's going on in this city.
And
Thank
I
you.
just want to mention a part of the city that Senator Ford didn't mention, Vine City English Avenue, okay? It is there, right? They have already used eminent domain to build the park called the Peace Park. I don't know how it can be a peace park when you're taking people's property to create it, but let's leave that aside. Now there is an environmental crisis there, right? And they're saying we've got to move people because the land is sick. But will they put the people back after they fix it? Or are they using these environmental crises, which may be real, to move people? And this pattern, one of the reasons we are talking about this pattern is so that people will recognize it when it comes to a community that they live in. I never expected this to happen to me. Ms. Darden never expected this to happen to her, but it can happen. And we want you to know what to look for.
We want to make sure we excuse me. I'm thinking I'm on radio tomorrow. We take audience questions, all right? My dear sister, how are you?
Fine, thank you. This isn't a question, but there is a retention pond that they built in between the stadium and the old Capitol Avenue schoolhouse. And that was supposed to be to capture some of the water that was going down into Peoplestown. But instead of just doing the sewage, it's capturing sewage. Okay? But nobody, they put the vats. I live right next door in the schoolhouse. And they did it, they didn't even really let us know that they were doing it. They worked 24 hours a day. This is a senior residence. And nobody told us, and we had the smell, okay? Then I'm also in Summer Hill. I'm a representative of the leadership community for Summer Hill. And I've gone around, I went and did the surveys before Georgia State even bought or was given. They didn't buy it, it was given, okay? And the developers were down before they even announced that they were going to sell the stadium. Carter was down there in front of City Hall. I only saw it on the news one time, but it was one time too many, because the right person saw it.
Hi, I had a question for Mr. Albin. So, I mean, given the bad precedent here, are you all looking at arguments outside of the takings clause? Like, I don't know if public money was used for any of this, but I mean, a False Claims Act maybe? Or fair housing disparate impact? Just curious what, because this is a really bad, and when you're saying it's just a rational basis standard, you're not going to win on that.
Yeah, so among the things that we've done since the Kelo decision is litigate these cases in state court, because one of the very few good things that came out of the Kelo opinion is the Supreme Court said, this is what the federal Constitution requires, but we don't control what state constitutions require. And as a result of the Kelo decision and the backlash that came after it, 45 states passed reforms, some of them even constitutional amendments, preventing the use of eminent domain abuse. And so we're currently litigating cases in state courts challenging this, trying to establish better law in as many states as we can to put an end to it. But we haven't written off the takings clause. We think the Supreme Court has certainly felt the backlash from this opinion and has seen the results of it. There was rampant eminent domain abuse in the few years after the decision before the economy tanked in 2009. And, you know, we expect and are seeing more eminent domain abuse as the economy has improved. So we think the Supreme Court's well aware of the consequences of the Kelo decision, and we think there are lots of other ways to limit the power of the government to use eminent domain through the federal Constitution, through the Takings Clause, different aspects of the Takings Clause. This case here, for instance, presents an issue of pretext. Can the government use a pretext to pursue a public use? And although the current law says if they have any rational basis, they can do it, the way law works is you bring cases and try to change the law, and that's what we're trying to do.
Good luck, and keep up the good work.
All right. We got 10 minutes. We got 10 minutes, and we have to start backing it up. Okay.
I own property on the Beltline. 340 feet of frontage on the Beltline. I've been after the Beltline since their inception to educate me about affordable housing. Right now, we can probably build about 50, 75 high-density units for elderly and disabled. There's a strip of land I used to lease from the railroad that sold it out from under me because I had the verbal right to acquire, but they sold it to the city. So now the Beltline and the city and I are, well, we just started renegotiating again when I visited the real estate person, John Lavelle. The city filed suit against me 28 days ago, calling my place a nuisance. I filed my preliminary answers this afternoon. I'm on the edge of Grant Park and Ormwood Park, so it's not just a black problem.
Yep, that's right. It's a land problem.
I just have a comment. I have been in Peoplestown all of my life, and it will be 70 years come August. And I want you to know we are behind you 1,000%, or however many millions, because it's wrong what they're doing. It's wrong. And as black people, you know, we know how to march. We know how to fight. Let's keep the fight going.
Okay, we have 5 minutes. All right, quick question.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment and thank Professor Washington for being on the air and sharing her story, and for me to be able to hear that morning, because usually when Dr. Ritchie ends, I turn off the radio. But that particular morning, I listened. I'm a native Atlantan, and so is my husband, and I have air property in Vine City that belonged to my grandparents. And, well, I'm fighting for it. Amen. Because I'm fighting against investors, I'm fighting against the city, I'm fighting against the council, and I'm not alone. My husband and family's with me. But when you have solid waste taxes to go from $74, and I have just the land, the home is not there now, to go from $74 a year to the council says it needs to be $500, and I can't pay that in increments, and I paid that myself in increments, and what did I get? A letter saying, we're about to put a lien on your property. So I'm just saying, we're in the good fight. Thank you, my sister, and we're going to stay in the fight.
Amen. One more.
I had a question because my aunt lives off Abner, in the Abner Grove Park area, or if y'all may know, like Flipper Temple area. And right now, I feel like we're in the beginning stages of this, because she's constantly, my aunt, she just turned 90, and she helped integrate that whole community. Like, she's one of the first Black people there, really the first home there. And now what's happening is people are banging on her door, trying to get her to sell her home. They're calling, harassing her calls. And then the thing is that all of us on top of that hill, everyone on the top of it, we all grew up there. Everybody's been there since the beginning. So everyone's holding on to their homes. But my thing is, with this starting, what are the next steps? What should we do for our community? You know, is it somewhere that we can, what can we start, or who can we contact to start getting the ball rolling for some kind of support?
Well, we know that we talked to some of your residents the other day at City Hall that were down there about that issue. And we should all know that this hasn't just started. It's just made its way to you guys more publicly, particularly with the new proposal of this huge park that they're proposing to put over there. But I know one thing that you all could do. There's an organization, it's the Grove Park organization, that they are looking for residents like your aunt to get involved and talk to. And they want you guys to come and speak, because they have formed an organization to protect long-term residents and people who've lived there forever. So I didn't get, did you get the number, Tim?
Yeah, I'm actually working, we do some trainings with them.
Yes. Yeah, but organizations that are fighting against all of these horrible policies that, you know, lead to displacement and all these bad infrastructure development projects should definitely research and get involved in those organizations.
All right, one more.
All right, quick question for you. Can you help us understand if it's been proposed, or why maybe it hasn't been considered? If the goal is to make the neighborhood better and the city sees it appropriate to take people's houses, that maybe other housing alternatives maybe near the area or, you know, within the area hasn't been considered or proposed, or has that even been a thing?
No, I mean, they've said that they want 3 ponds and a waterfall. Now, maybe that's, you know, code for condos. It's possible, right? Because we see these projects that start out being one thing, and then they're like, oh, we ran out of money and we're going to have to build condos. That's what we're building in Atlanta, is stadiums and luxury living spaces. And so when we see a bike lane, as Senator Ford said, when we see new infrastructure going in, we get nervous, because they're not building it for the people who are there, they're building it for the people they want to come. This Park and Pond project it's Japanese themed, it's got waterfalls and walking bridges and an educational kiosk that's bigger than the houses that they want to tear down to make room for it. So I don't know exactly who the money is behind it, but there's some money behind it, or there's some broken pipe that they don't want to fix.
Wow.
Professor Washington, one of the things that struck me in the movie, there was an 87-year-old woman, and they said that they're waiting for her to pass. Ms. Darden, can you talk about Ms. Jackson and what the city has said?
Well, I like to address that. I was at City Hall. Well, no, when we was at the trial. And the judge asked the city attorney, what are you going to do with Miss Maddie Jackson home? Well, we're just waiting for her to transpire. Those are his words. And the judge said, oh, you just waiting for her to die? Those are his words. And so I said, did he say that? Kateem Reed told Miss Maddie Jackson, I was standing beside her, you can live in your house as long as you want. Those was his exact words. In 2012, when the flood came, he came out in a Winnebago and told me and my husband, we asked him point blank, will we have to move out our homes? Will we be displaced? He said, oh, no, ma'am, no, ma'am. No one will have to move and no one will be displaced. And then a year later, we get a letter saying, you want to buy our house? What's up with that? And then you tell Miss Maddie Jackson she can stay in her house as long as she wants, But then the judge, the lawyer for the city is saying, we just gonna wait till she die. How heartbreaking is that? How inconsiderate is that? They're not for the people, and they letting us know point blank that they don't have our best interests at heart. We've lived there for 30 years, my husband and I. My husband worked for the city for 30 years.
32, right?
A veteran. He knows the city. Been here since 1969. And I came in 1972. And for them to tell us that we have to move because they want to put a park in the pond there, and then sue us because we won't move using eminent domain without just cause.
Just think about how far you have devolved as a person, because we all have jobs. But think about how far you have devolved when you can say publicly, we're just waiting on this woman to die. Who raised you? Who raised you?
And just to add to that, not just some woman who put her life on the line
Right.
for the city of Atlanta, who did everything for the city of Atlanta. And there was a saying, like, if you were running for mayor in Atlanta and you didn't run it by Mr. Jackson,
Right.
you weren't getting elected. It's horrible.
Yeah.
It is horrible how we treat each other.
But she's alive and well and still kicking, right?
She is.
And
Right,
she
she ain't going
turns,
nowhere.
Miss Maddie turns 98 next week.
Yeah.
And she is still there, and she plans to be there. Her daughter says she's going to live to be 113.
That's right.
We just got the call that we are being evicted
Okay.
from this space.
Placed.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give the panel a round of applause. Thank you for being here. TLA Real Estate, make sure you talk to Teddy from TLA Real Estate. He'll stick around. Thank you.
Great.